for every student in the state this school year, another $204 more on top of that next year. And that was really a joint effort with us and the legislature working together. We made a number of other investments, but one of the key things, we wanted $204 more on top of that next year. And that was really a joint effort with us and the legislature working together. We made a number of other investments, but one of the key things we wanted to do that kind of was the next step is make sure we did more for our rural school districts. And so the legislation we're advocating going forward on will be passed within the next month and a half before the end of the legislative session would be to fully fund sparsity aid by putting an extra $100 in per student for school districts, rural small districts all across the state. They face unique challenges when it comes to transportation and just the distance covered in a school district. That would be on top of the $200 we already put in this year and the $204 on top of that next year. And that's really to make sure that some of the unique costs that tie into transportation and just dealing with the distance doesn't detract from the money that school districts like Athens and others can put right into the classroom, helping support student success for the kind of students we just saw here in this gym today. We find that to be really important, not just for success of our students, but because increasingly we're hearing from employers all across the state, big and small alike, that they need more qualified workers. And so getting that head start, doing academic and career plans, doing more dual enrollment, doing more things like they're doing here, even with distance learning, more things that give students a head start on not just graduating from high school, but getting that next step in their career, whether it's an apprenticeship, whether it's a technical college, whether it's the University of Wisconsin system, or one of our great private colleges and universities. The students here and at other school districts across the state deserve to have access to a great education because good schools equal a good life. They're proud of their schools here. They should be. This gives them more resources to do that and make those sorts of investments going forward.
Governor, as you know, some low revenue districts would be able to raise that revenue ceiling, which means the school board could potentially increase property taxes on without a referendum. Do you worry that some conservatives, you might face a little headwind from conservatives on raising taxes that school boards might be able to do?
No, overall, and the way this was passed, even when the budget came out, it's the same provision. The only thing we took out was we made a requirement that if a school district had failed on a referendum, they couldn't immediately do this in a low revenue school district, so respectful of those local taxpayers and their decision as voters. But when the provision came out of the budget, they pointed out that even with those changes, the overall property tax burden in the state will be lower in 2018 than it was in December of 2010. So even with these changes allowing lower revenue districts to be up at a level compatible with other school districts across the state, the overall level of property taxes in 2018 at the end of this year will be lower than they were before we started at the end of 2010. That's on top of the income tax cuts and the other things that we've done. The total amount of tax relief since we've taken office will now exceed $8 billion. And that means Wisconsin now has lower property taxes as a share of our individual incomes than we've had at any time since World War II. So we've lowered property taxes. This year, with the help of the legislature, we got rid of the state property tax. We've done other things to provide long-term permanent property tax relief. This is just one more tool to help local school districts, particularly smaller rural districts that have been revenue challenged in the past, have the resources they need.
Governor, your critics are charging that the additional money for schools is because you're running for a third term. Is that true? And how would you distinguish your position on money for schools from that of Superintendent Tony Evers and the Democrats who are running with him to take your position?
Well, Dr. Evers, to his credit, actually praised what we did yesterday because he was being intellectually honest, unlike the others. I proposed this a year ago. So if they're saying it's an election year ploy, the only ploy being made is those who are cynics opposing it now who didn't say that last year. We actually proposed in the budget, it was taken out, we're putting it back in again. Again, credit to Dr. Evers for being at least intellectually honest enough to admit and acknowledge that that what we proposed in terms of overall per pupil increases was exactly what the Department of Public Instruction asked for. What we proposed for additional sparsity aid in the budget was actually greater than what Dr. Evers and the Department of Public Instruction asked for. And so he's supportive of what we're doing because it's the right thing to do regardless of whether it's 2018 or it's some other year out there. And I think the only people who are being political about it are the people who are objecting to it now when we did it last year.
In regards to Lincoln Hills, why did it take so long to have your office do anything with regards to Lincoln Hills and then the overcrowding. I was told by your office that you've been working on this for a little over a year, but you also found out about this 6 years ago.
Well, the changes have been made, the Department of Corrections have been made consistently over the last several years. We take safety and security, so what was announced this past week isn't the first step, it's one of many steps. What we did was look at long-term, saying, what's the right way to reform the juvenile justice system? A system, I might add, it's been around since 1959. Since 1959, the state has put a focus on 1 or 2 facilities to hold almost all the juvenile offenders. Remember, these are people who haven't committed, these aren't shoplifting crimes, these are people who've committed serious offenses that had it been adults at the time, they would have been in prison for felonies. In the past, for decades before we came in, the focus was on 1 or 2 large-scale facilities. We started looking over the last couple of years at other ways that other states provide those services. We started working with county officials in particular last year, but we knew we weren't going to just rush into something so we could say we were doing something different. We wanted something to be meaningful, and we wanted to ensure that it could work. There was a push in Milwaukee to have just one site down there for a portion of their offenders, but we knew that would cause chaos for the 71 other counties across the state. And so it wasn't until we had confidence that we could support all the counties in the state with meaningful reform that would go to 5 sites spread around the state and 1 additional site at Mendota, where we have a world-renowned mental health program, that was the best approach going forward in terms of reform. But again, for those who cynically look at this, there have been changes made for years in terms of staffing, pay increases, security, cameras, access, equipment, other things they've been doing there per the request of the Department of Correction for quite some time now.
Any way you
Governor,
can,
back to this, why we're here today, what has the feedback been like from these rural school districts?
In terms of the reaction to this, very positive. When we brought up sparsity rate increases last year, school districts across the state, not only the School Boards Association, but particularly the groups associated with rural school districts, were very positive that. I think many were disappointed. It did not pass through the final budget. That's why we worked with legislative leaders to include the increased aid for rural school districts. At the same time, we found a way to account for lower revenue districts to get them up at a reasonable level and still do it without an overall property tax increase for the state as a whole.
Governor, is there any way we can speed up the closure of Lincoln Hills and moving those students to those 5 regional centers instead of having it happen late in 2019?
Sure, and we'll talk about that in the state of the state in terms of what we think the next step is to move on it quicker. I said the day we announced it, when some called for that we're very much open and willing to work with the legislature on that. The key is you physically have to have a place for them to go, and so our thrust is on building the 5 additional structures across the state and expanding the opportunities out at Mendota, which is in the Madison area. We can't close something without having a place to put individuals, because remember, the counties can't keep these individuals because these are the most serious criminal offenders that they have within this age category, so they have to have a place to send them. But we believe our plan is the right approach to go, so it's why you saw broad-based bipartisan support. Both Democrat and Republican lawmakers have worked with us on the plan and praised it. You saw the judiciary talk about this. You saw county officials, not only in Lincoln County, but Milwaukee County, and through the Counties Association statewide, all say this is the right approach going forward.
Would you support bonding to get money to get those facilities built earlier or faster?
Well, that's what we proposed to do in the first place, is bonding.
Yeah.
So the
okay.
timing would.
If there was additional bonding that could help,
Well, I don't think the timing issue is a matter of bonding. You can do the
Okay.
bonding either way. And we actually think, even with bonding, the way to do this will actually be in the future be a savings to the state, as odd as that sounds, because right now, the state of Wisconsin, in large part because of law changes made over the last several years when it comes to drunk driving, has seen an acceleration in the number of offenders in the state system, again, because of the state taking drunk driving more seriously with repeat offenders. And so as that adult population has gone up, the state's Department of Corrections had to contract out of the state system for more prison beds. This will allow us to build these new facilities, bond for those, which is part of our plan, but you're right, we can approve the bonding sooner. So that's part of what we're gonna talk about in the state of state. Could we speed up the bonding ahead of the capital budget? I believe we can. We'll spell out what our expectation is for that. They'd have to issue the RFPs, get going on that rather quickly, which we're willing to do and have the ability to do going forward. But it would save us money because we could use the facility at Lincoln, in Lincoln County to house adult offenders, particularly for those who need alcohol and drug abuse treatment, instead of contracting outside of the state system.
That answers my question.
Is,
Thank you.
is there a possibility of privatization? I know that Wisconsin doesn't allow for private prisons, but I know that back in the 90s, you were a proponent for that. Is that a possibility? You know, that's something that employees there are worried about.
No, I don't see any interest in that. In fact, part of what we proposed when the Department of Corrections and the Secretary notified all the employees there was that they'd have an opportunity to be at any of the 6 new facilities, or they could opt to work at the new adult facility that would be there, either case, whether they wanted to stay close by there or go to one of the other sites, one of which at least would be in northern Wisconsin. They would have those options. But to me, that's more rabble-rousing by a few of the detractors. In the end, our focus is on public employees operating all these facilities.
Last one, please.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, last week, the Department of Revenue and yourself estimated the typical relief from federal tax reform at $2,508. Representative Duffy had a town hall at NTC on Thursday and said it was a typical family would have $1,200 worth of tax relief, half of what your estimate is. Who's right?
Again, I'd have to look at what his estimates are. The Department of Revenue estimates are the same model they use, whether it was me, Jim Doyle, others. They use a typical family of 4, 2 adults working, 2 children, and so that's the assessment they use. They try not to change the model from before. Some have said, well, why not this, why not that? It's just the same
The
model.
kids aren't working though, right?
What's that?
Are the kids working?
Kids are not working, no, they would be minors. So it's having 2 kids, 2 adults working. And
Now-
for that family, which again is the model we've used before, he may have, I'd have to go back and look at what Representative Duffy was talking about. He may have picked a specific county or a particular region, or maybe did it by his congressional district. That might be the case, you'd have to ask him. What we did was statewide, based upon a family of 4, which is the way the Department of Revenue, regardless of who's in office, has historically made assessments on changes to federal tax law. They've looked at what is the impact on a family of 4, a typical family in the state, and a typical family, as you mentioned, in the state of Wisconsin, under the federal tax law changes, would save about $2,500.
And so a 2-person earner would make in this state $94,000,
2 together would be, that's the average statewide.
you think?
One-
Okay.
Well, I mean, I don't think, that's it's not my number, it's the Department of Revenue. They take what the average is in the state of Wisconsin. Some make more, some make less. That's why, again, I'd be happy to follow up with you on Congressman Duffy, but my guess would be different parts of the state, the average would be less or more, depending on what the average is for the average taxpayer. But for the average taxpayer, which the scenario in the past has been a family of 4, and they've done that assessment through the Department of Revenue. Anytime there's been federal law changes, when they looked at this, that's what they concluded.
All right, last one, please.
One quick question on the sheriff for Milwaukee County.
Uh-huh.
Where is the progress on that, especially now that they don't have a police chief as well?
Well, the police chief doesn't have anything to do
Right.
with the sheriff there. In both cases, they'll have an acting chief, and that's picked not by the state, but by the Fire and Police Commission, the city of Milwaukee. Right now, Milwaukee County has an acting sheriff, so they have someone handling those responsibilities. And part of what we've been waiting for is waiting to hear about a review being done in Milwaukee County on the sheriff's jail operations. And before we make a pick there, we want to make sure we know what's going on.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Kevin.